Montana gives landlords broad freedom to set and raise rent, and the state's independent spirit is reflected in a regulatory framework that favors property rights while still providing basic tenant protections. The governing law is found in the Montana Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, Montana Code Annotated Title 70, Chapter 24. And while it establishes procedural requirements for the landlord-tenant relationship, it places no restrictions on the amount a landlord can charge for rent. Montana does not have rent control or rent stabilization of any kind. There is no state statute that caps rent increases, limits the frequency of increases, or requires landlords to obtain government approval before raising rent. Montana's political and regulatory philosophy strongly favors individual property rights and minimal government intervention in private business. Montana has not enacted a specific preemption statute prohibiting local rent control. This means that municipalities could theoretically attempt to enact their own rent regulations under their local authority. This is relevant because Montana's housing affordability conversation has intensified in recent years, particularly in communities like Bozeman, Missoula, Whitefish, and Kalispell, where rapid growth has driven rents to levels that were unimaginable a decade ago. While no Montana municipality has enacted rent control to date, the political pressure in high-growth communities has created discussions that landlords should monitor. In fact, Montana's legislature has considered bills related to rent regulation in recent sessions, reflecting the growing tension between property rights and affordability in the state's most desirable communities. While these proposals have not passed, the fact that they're being introduced signals that the political landscape is evolving. Landlords should stay informed about legislative developments at both the state and local level. For month-to-month tenancies, the landlord must provide advance written notice before a rent increase takes effect. Montana requires at least 30 days written notice before changes to the terms of a monthly tenancy. So, if rent is due on the 1st and you want the increase to take effect on May 1st, you need to deliver the notice by April 1st at the latest. The notice should be in writing and should clearly state the current rent, the new rent amount, and the effective date. Montana doesn't prescribe a specific statutory form for rent increase notices, but a clear written notice delivered by a documented method, personal delivery, certified mail, or posting and mailing, is always recommended. For fixed-term leases, the rent is locked in for the duration of the lease term, unless the lease includes a provision allowing mid-term increases. Without such a provision, the landlord must wait until the lease expires to negotiate a new rent. When the lease approaches expiration, the landlord should communicate the proposed new rate well in advance to give the tenant time to evaluate the new terms and make an informed decision. If the tenant doesn't agree to the new rate, the lease expires at its natural end. If the tenant stays and the landlord accepts rent, the tenancy converts to a month-to-month arrangement, subject to the 30-day notice requirement for future changes. For week-to-week tenancies, the notice period for rent changes follows the one rental period rule, 7 days notice before the end of the weekly term. Now let's cover the restrictions that apply even without rent control. Rent increases cannot be retaliatory. Montana has anti-retaliation protections under the Residential Landlord and Tenant Act that prohibit landlords from raising rent in retaliation for a tenant exercising their legal rights. Protected activities include making a good faith complaint about habitability to the landlord or a government agency, reporting a code violation, exercising any right under the Landlord-Tenant Act, and participating in a tenants organization. Montana's anti-retaliation framework provides that adverse action taken within a reasonable time after the tenant's protected activity creates a presumption of retaliation. The landlord must then demonstrate that the increase was motivated by legitimate business factors, market conditions, operating cost changes, or property improvements, rather than by the tenant's complaint. The consequences of a retaliatory rent increase in Montana can include liability for actual damages and up to 3 months' rent in penalties, plus attorney's fees. These are significant penalties that make retaliatory rent increases a costly mistake. Rent increases also cannot be discriminatory. Under the Federal Fair Housing Act and the Montana Human Rights Act, found in Montana Code Annotated Title 49, Chapter 2, landlords cannot raise rent based on a tenant's race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, familial status, age, marital status, or creed. Montana's anti-discrimination protections include age, marital status, and creed beyond the federal categories. The Montana Human Rights Bureau investigates fair housing complaints and can take enforcement action including ordering damages, injunctive relief, and civil penalties. A discriminatory rent increase can result in significant liability. From a practical standpoint, Montana's rental market has undergone a dramatic transformation over the past several years, and the state now has some of the most extreme housing affordability challenges in the Mountain West. Bozeman has been at the epicenter of Montana's housing crisis. The city, home to Montana State University and a booming technology, outdoor recreation, and lifestyle economy, has seen explosive population growth driven by remote workers, retirees, second home buyers, and entrepreneurs relocating from higher-cost markets. Bozeman's rental market has tightened to extraordinary levels, and rents have increased at rates that have shocked longtime residents. What was once an affordable college town now has rents comparable to mid-tier markets in states like Colorado and Washington. The influx of higher-income residents has created a stark affordability gap. Service workers, educators, healthcare workers, and students who form the backbone of Bozeman's community are increasingly priced out of the local rental market. This dynamic has driven intense political discussion about housing policy, and Bozeman has been at the forefront of Montana's affordability conversation. Missoula, home to the University of Montana, has experienced similar pressures. The city has a tight housing market with limited buildable land, strong demand from university-affiliated residents and lifestyle migrants, and rents that have increased substantially. Missoula's progressive political culture has made it one of the most likely Montana communities to explore additional tenant protections, and landlords in Missoula should be particularly attentive to local policy developments. The Flathead Valley, including Kalispell, Whitefish, and Columbia Falls, near Glacier National Park, has seen extraordinary growth driven by tourism, recreation, and remote work migration. Whitefish in particular has become a destination for high-income buyers and renters, pushing rents to levels that are challenging for local workers. The seasonal nature of the tourism economy adds complexity. Demand peaks during ski season and summer, creating seasonal pricing pressures. Billings, Montana's largest city, has a more stable and moderately priced rental market. The city's economy is driven by healthcare, particularly the Billings Clinic and St. Vincent Healthcare, energy, agriculture, and regional commerce. Rents in Billings have increased, but at a more sustainable pace than in the western Montana resort and university communities. Landlords in Billings generally have reliable pricing power without the extreme volatility seen in Bozeman or Whitefish. Great Falls, home to Malmstrom Air Force Base, has a military-influenced rental market. Military tenants' housing budgets are tied to BAH rates, and landlords near the base should monitor annual BAH adjustments when planning rent increases. The broader Great Falls market is more affordable than western Montana and offers moderate pricing power. Helena, the state capital, has a rental market driven by state government employment and a growing healthcare sector. Rents are moderate by Montana standards, and the market is stable. Rural Montana has widely varying rental dynamics. Agricultural communities have rental demand tied to farming cycles. Energy-producing areas in eastern Montana may see demand fluctuations tied to oil and gas activity. Small tourist towns near national parks and recreation areas may have strong seasonal demand, but limited year-round rental markets. One best practice for Montana landlords, particularly in high-growth markets like Bozeman and Missoula, be strategic about the magnitude and timing of rent increases. While Montana law doesn't cap the amount, implementing extremely large increases in a single year can backfire in several ways. Large increases attract negative attention from tenant advocates and media in communities where affordability is already a hot-button issue. They increase the likelihood of tenant turnover, which generates vacancy and turnover costs. And they can create political pressure for rent regulation, which would ultimately restrict every landlord's pricing freedom. Moderate annual increases that track with the market are generally more sustainable and less disruptive than dramatic jumps. Another best practice: document your business justification thoroughly for every increase, especially in communities where the affordability conversation is active. Keep records of market comparables, operating cost changes, including the property tax increases that have accompanied rising property values in growth areas, insurance premium changes, and any capital improvements. This documentation protects you against retaliation claims and demonstrates that your pricing reflects legitimate business factors. Montana's climate creates practical considerations that affect the rental market and landlord costs. Heating costs in Montana are substantial, particularly in the northern and mountain communities where winter temperatures can be extreme. If you include utilities in the rent, heating cost increases may be a legitimate driver of rent adjustments. If tenants pay their own utilities, the total housing cost to the tenant includes both rent and heating expenses, and large rent increases on top of already high utility costs can push the total burden beyond what tenants can absorb. Montana also has specific requirements for manufactured home communities under the Montana Mobile Home Lot Rental Act, Title 70, Chapter 33. Landlords who own or manage manufactured home parks must follow specific notice and procedural requirements for lot rent increases that differ from standard residential tenancies. These requirements include longer notice periods and additional protections for manufactured home park residents. For Montana landlords who participate in the Housing Choice Voucher Program, rent increases must be approved by the local housing authority. The authority evaluates whether the proposed rent is reasonable by comparing it to comparable unassisted units. Given Montana's rapidly changing market conditions in some communities, housing authorities may lag behind actual market rents, which can create friction between the proposed rent and the authority's comparable analysis. Montana requires landlords to return the security deposit within 10 days of the tenant vacating if there are no deductions, or within 30 days if the landlord needs to assess damages. Montana's 10-day window for no deduction returns is one of the shortest in the country. While this doesn't directly regulate rent increases, landlords should understand that increasing rent doesn't automatically entitle them to collect additional deposit from an existing tenant without a new agreement. For the complete guide to Montana rent increase laws, visit tenantscreeningbackgroundcheck.com. Subscribe to our channel for every state in our landlord-tenant law series.